Heading into the holidays, we're revisiting two crucial episodes. We address how the holidays pose the perfect time of the year with reduced staffing and seasonal coverage for threat actors to attempt to breach industrial systems. We also offer practical steps the C-suite can take to strengthen their cybersecurity posture during this high-risk period when organizations are vulnerable to sophisticated attacks. Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
You have to be able to create an extension to staff who has the skills and experience and knowledge on what it is that's relevant and important to pull out of that environment. You can't measure what you're not managing, and you're not managing it today. Take asset inventory, for example. How do you do that today? Is it a manual process? At certain times of the year, you send people out there with clipboards and are just out there documenting the assets that you have in the space. And are you getting the vulnerability management information? Probably not. So why wouldn't you want to do continuous monitoring? IT does continuous monitoring in their environment. Well, why would you want to do the same thing on the plant floor? And you can do that in a non-disruptive way, right? Where you're not being impacted or impeding their ability. But there's a commonality, right? Continuous monitoring. They're doing it for all of their stuff. Why aren't you doing it for your plant floor control systems, your PLCs, your HMIs, your drives, your robots, your reactors, your fillers, your labelers, your depalletizers? This equipment that you have that's connected in the plant floor, you can do the same thing to continuously monitor it for asset inventory and get vulnerability management that he's doing for all their stuff.
But I think it takes more involvement on the OT side. You can't just sit behind a desk and punch a keyboard and it just magically work. It takes involvement. It takes time. It takes key people that are, I would call them the asset owners, the process control engineers, the teams down in the plant floor that are responsible for those assets. They have to understand that. They have to know how to interpret the data to feed that back up to that C-suite so they can make business decisions on risk.
You know how you motivate the plant floor people? Increasing their bonus. How do you increase their bonus? By doing better by making goods.
Yep.
Reduce my costs, reduce my downtime, be safe, make more goods.
But that's
their revenue goes up, their bonuses go up.
But that's part of the problem.
But if you told the plant manager, it's like, how would you like to add an extra $50,000 to your bonus this year? You think he'd be interested in that?
He absolutely.
Well, sure he would be.
But if I'm the CISO and I say, okay, to do that, I need to take your plant down for a week because I need to do all these updates on those Windows 7 machines and those Windows 10 machines and all that stuff that's vulnerable. And I'm going to replace all those PLCs 10 years old or 15 years old because they have a vulnerability in them. And I'm going to need you to be closed for a month.
Never going to happen.
Exactly. That's exactly correct.
You're not going to replace the Windows 10 machine that's end of life or Windows X7. You're not going to do that either. That's why IT walks away. Once you know that, then that's when they fall back and say, I can't influence that. I can't change that. So why do I want to be responsible for that? That's their position. And even worse, when you have an OEM who's dictating for everybody on what you can do to that machine center, now it's just a black box sitting on your plant floor that does all this magical stuff and nobody knows what's going on inside of it. So that's a whole different discussion. So how do you get through all of that stuff? And it's by starting a process of beginning to do continuous monitoring to set a baseline on your vulnerabilities that you have. If you've got PLCs that haven't been patched in 5 years, I know you're not going to go out there and immediately start patching them, but there might be some patches, some firmware updates that you can push to them to start minimizing. Instead of having 300 vulnerabilities, maybe you can get down to 100. Burn some things off that shouldn't be out there, like PLCs that are acting as web servers, or soft PLCs out there that you have no idea what's on those, right? And we find soft PLCs out there in the environment. That's a full-blown Linux computer, could have Windows running on it as far as, and it's completely out of IT's purview, and he's not going to dictate, do squat anything to that soft PLC that's running those laser cutters. C-suite needs to understand that. There is clear lines of delineation that your IT group is never going to penetrate, nor do they want to. So then you have to get your OT people to start stepping up, take the reins of this and say, okay, you are going to have to participate and I'm going to help you. They have to start developing their own budgets, their own funding, building their own relationships with the vendors who specialize in this space space. You just can't go to an IT partner who sells Fortinet hardware, for example, and expect that IT VAR to come down there and start working on your plant floor and know exactly how I'm going to secure and protect this environment without even understanding anything about the relationships between those machine centers. And how do you get that? How do you know which PLCs are talking to which PLCs, which HMIs, which engineering workstations? How do you know what's in control, what that process is supposed to work? And it can change, right? It could be a seasonal, a product change, and all of a sudden relationships within those machine centers can change month to month, week to week, quarter to quarter. You never know. How do you get your arms around that, right? And there's tools and technology we have today that will do that, but you have to have some knowledge of the process and operations of that plant. And if you're not willing to learn that, you can't secure that.
There are options for organizations. There are things they can do, whether that's choose a tool, start working with your local vendors. If they're halfway through the journey, maybe they're just trying to get more of that east-west traffic, not just the north-south traffic. One choice, which is, in my opinion, a very poor choice, and hopefully no organization makes this, you can choose to do nothing. You can choose to ignore it, keep your head buried in the sand, and just let it go status quo and hope you're not the next victim of a situation. But that is a choice that they are entitled to. But if they're looking at truly trying to mitigate risk for the organization, they have to go back to that same amount of due diligence and care on the manufacturing environment, those industrial control systems, as they do the IT, and they're just not doing it.
You got to think of it like safety. You can't do nothing when it comes to safety, right? That's an option.
Some people do, and the OSHA doesn't like it, but some people do.
Yeah, they do until then they get fined when somebody gets hurt or killed, and then they deal with that, and you get the bad rap, and then your safety numbers that you had with nobody got hurt for 780 days goes back to zero, and the bonuses reset, and all other kind of metrics reset when that happens. And again, you can be that way. You could act like a third world country operating your plant, run stuff till it breaks. I don't care if people get hurt. And who wants to do business with them?
Nobody does.
You don't want to go work in that plant if it's not safe. I don't want to go to that plant.
No.
So that's not an option. It's started. Where do we go? And I'm just saying you can't fall to IT to get all the way through. IT is a good place to begin it, to try to get all the right people together, governance, policy, technology per se. They just can't be the ones that take the spinning tire that's up here in the air and get it on the road and move it down the road. And you got to think globally, but you got to act locally because the plants have their own fiefdom. They have their own P&L. They pick their partners. They pick their machine centers. Not very many follow some corporate standard per se. And if there is a corporate standard, it's usually IT's corporate standard. It comes from the networking perspective, maybe some of the computing platforms that are under control, all the way down through into the network, into the data center at the plant, the core network, and maybe at the IDF or access layer. Once you start drifting down into that control system environment, all bets are off at that stage.
All the time, in every manufacturing plant we go into, any standard, whether it's internet access only for certain things, you and I both know if a plant needs internet access and they've got somebody in IT saying, you need to fill out this 35-page document and we need to know why you get it. They're going to throw the document in the trash can. They're going to call their internet service provider. They're going to bring in a DSL line the next day, and they got their own internet access. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. The OEM will do it when they look at the requirements. It's like, you want me to help you fix that machine in the middle of the night, I need access to it. And I'm not going to try to pop my way through some IT network that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I need some reliability on a particular space. So time has come, and we see it, right? This momentum has been growing over the last several years. And now the word OT actually means something. You say that to some people and they actually know what it is. A few years ago, a lot of people don't even know what OT meant. And there's a lot of technologies out there. The question is, which is the best one? You got to do your homework. You should be doing your studying. You should be doing your analysis. You should be POCing. You should be demoing. How do you make yourself smarter about it? Or that's one methodology. Other methodology is go to the players that are already in the space and see what the heck they're doing. People have been doing it for some number of years. I used to work for Rockwell Automation. I remember going into a plant that this customer spent $10 million a year buying technology and services from Rockwell. Went in there with the account quite a bit. And we were going to go meet with the CIO. And this was right after WannaCry, Not Pay It came out and was causing all this havoc. I remember asking the CIO, this is the first time we've actually sat down and met with this person. It's never before met with their automation technology vendor. You as a CIO, if you're spending millions of dollars with Siemens or Rockwell or Schneider or Honeywell and some of these OEMs and SIs, you need to sit down and have conversations with them, just like you do with your networking people and your Windows partner or your SAP partner or your web developing group or your applications development group. These relationships that you have with those vendors and suppliers to the IT side. If you really want to get into this game on the OT side, you need to start building a relationship with these OT suppliers who are supplying technology in your environment. And if you're not doing that, then why the heck would you think you would be able to manage and support OT cybersecurity if you don't have a relationship with somebody you're spending $10 million with every year buying their technology and PLCs and SCADA software and switches and drives and motors and MCCs, all of these different things? Where you at? Where you at, Mr. and Mrs. CIO? Because if you're not there, then why would OT give you the time of day?
It's true. We see it day in and day out.
Well, we see it at the shows that we go to. You go to these OT specific shows. Where are the CIOs at? Where's the director of networking at? But an S4 conference or Rockwell Automation, you don't see them there.
No, we don't. There needs to be, if we go back and we look at the C-suite and the board, are there certain things that we would recommend that they start to do to try and take those steps? Do they need to ask themselves, is it back to the fundamentals? Who ultimately owns that responsibility? That's a key thing. Someone has to own it. The CEO, they can't own it. Ultimately, they're responsible. They've got people underneath them that should own that. But the responsibility, if they don't, is going to fall to that C-suite and that board of directors ultimately. And they've got to take steps to begin figuring this out. They have to. They can no longer do status quo. They can't.
Sometimes it takes an event to get them off a dead center to start moving forward. My take on it from a C-suite perspective is on the OT side of the house. That's where I think you should start as far as having this conversation about how do we get better? How can we improve not only our cyber hygiene, our cyber posture, but how do we start working with our supply chain and our OEMs, our system integrators that we rely on to put stuff for our plants to make the goods we make. And if you're some manufacturers, they actually are OEMs themselves and they're selling control systems on the product they're shipping out the door. And what are you doing to make that stuff better for the clients that are buying that stuff? Because I will tell you that if you're selling to the government, if you're selling to an Amazon or a Microsoft or a Google, they're starting to expect that you're doing that due diligence on OT cybersecurity on your side for the machines you're giving me.
Seeing supply chain clients that are managing to a contract that they have with a vendor that uniquely specifies they have certain cyber hygiene in place, or that vendor is going to cancel that contract.
The business.
Totally agree. Yeah.
If you can't demonstrate a plan of action that you have in place to do this stuff, you're not getting the business. It's here now. It's happening, and it's going to continue to foster and grow. That if you want to sell your product to company X and they come back and say, well, what's your cyber hygiene practices on your plant floor? And you sit there and got a big goose egg for a number. Yeah. That's a deal you're not going to get.
We even provide a tabletop exercise with key executives, key stakeholders within that organization, just for alignment. It's a starting point. It's not the end, but it's a beginning. It's, hey, how would we do that? Because in a crisis, you don't want to build your plan. You don't want to try and do this in the middle of an event. You need to have this well rehearsed, understand who owns it, who the stakeholders are, who's responsible, so that when, not if, but when something does happen, the organization is prepared. And that falls to the executives to ensure that that's being done.
I've seen the executives, some of them, they feel like they're handcuffed, that they don't know how to knife fight this even with their own organization.
Yeah.
It's between IT and OT, for example. Because if OT is not willing to step up and start asking these questions and actually try to be engaged and involved, then CEO is going to have a hard time convincing them to do that, I believe. Because fallback, they got the ball. He's got it. And we know that they don't. But OT has to see the value. And the only way OT is ever going to see the value is when it starts coming at them through their supply chain and their trusted advisors and partners that they work with every day. When you're hearing this from Rockwell, you're hearing this from Siemens, you're hearing this from your OEM, you're hearing this from your SIs, you're hearing it from your partners that you're buying stuff from, that's when they're going to start paying attention on the OT side. That's when the epiphany hits them. Is, well, what do you mean I need to have a sensor in that panel that collects all this metadata and sends it to this platform? Why would I do that? And it's like having OnStar in your vehicle. You buy a vehicle, it's got OnStar on it. For the first 60 or 90 days, you get a free subscription. And so you can see what it is and you know what it is, and you can either decide you want to keep it or you don't. You can quit paying for the subscription, it shuts down, but it's still there. The next person that buys that vehicle, they can decide to turn OnStar back on. Or maybe after the first time you have a wreck out in the middle of the country, there's no SOS button to work for you. You, you can't make the call. Maybe you decide, maybe I should turn that stuff back on.
I think I can bring up the one situation that we had, because by the time this comes out, the case study will be published on this, but it was in the November timeframe. And there was this client that we were working with had a phishing email, clicked the credentials, and within 24 hours, and this was in the November timeframe, they were signing in to their network. And that was in the November timeframe. Why? Because they can ramp it up. They know that because of short staff, somebody might not be around to do the right approval or the right monitoring, and they were in. And the thing to remember there too is not only is that from the IT side into the OT side, it happens both places, but that occurred after no external events for 2 years. Nothing for 2 years. And they were getting better throughout, a continuous improvement, watching more, hardening their environment. But it was 2 years, and that one event occurred over the holiday season, and it could have shut them down had they not done those steps, had they not put that process in place and the roles identified on who it was going to be and who do you call. So suddenly it's November, it's deer camp, it's Thanksgiving, it's the holiday season. And that person at least knew who to call and find them, wake them up so they could call somebody and get the right resources in the room. Anyone that hears this can look this up and see the case study. Prevented a complete shutdown because it was a manufacturing environment that, well, it's just like stuff could blow up. And very, very important to make sure nobody was in there. Nobody made those changes. Nothing was compromised, but it happened. It took time for that organization and for us to help them get to that point. So they knew how to align their people, processes, and technology, because even though nothing happened for 2 years, the one time that it does happen is the time that you've been preparing for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the extreme amount of caution that's taken, right? When you have a breach like that and you don't know how far and wide it's gone because you don't have the tools and technologies process in place, you go naturally, Colonial Pipeline, you take the shutdown. You go ahead and shut down because you don't know how far the breach has gone, because you don't have visibility into the systems that may have received that ransomware, that malware. And, you know, when you think about it from the IT world, it has a staff and a group of people who are supposed to be in a position that when this does happen, to jump on it quickly and try to get it isolated and get it locked down. And with all the tools that they have, they know where it is, compared to their OT side of the world where they know nothing. They know even less about what's going on the plant floor or what's down there because it's not their area of responsibility typically. So they don't know the status of the Windows machines. They don't know the status of the networking switches that are involved on the control system side or the PLCs. So then who do you rely on? So one, you're going to take the shutdown and just an abundance of caution, number one. And number two, the time to get back up and running to recover is much, much longer because you're not aware of how far the breach has gone. And so it takes you a lot longer to get in there and uncover whether you have it in there or not. And if you do have it in there, how do you get it out? How do you eradicate it? Right.
Right. Yeah, because the manufacturer keeps running even over the holidays. On the IT side in the corporate world, you can turn your PC off when you go, but on the operational side, those things are still on and running. And speaking of kind of turning that off, I mean, we haven't even touched on it, but just the power implications of the holiday season where you get storms and now you've added a whole nother element to the mix.
Again, yeah, it's kind of back to the supply chain. And you should test power outages when you can, especially if you have backup systems. You know, I mean, if you have a lot of backups in your network and with your technology, do you test that, right? In case you do lose power, to your point, for some reason because of a storm. And I've witnessed that. I've witnessed that with hurricanes. I've witnessed that with earthquakes, where you've lost the ability you have to shut the plant down for these disasters, if you will, and what it takes to do that, and then what it takes to bring that plant back up online after an event like that happens. So yeah, it's one of those things where you can't foresee the future, but it still doesn't mean that you can't do a better job of putting the tools and technologies, people and process and techniques in place to be able to circumvent any of these types of problems we're talking about, right? Whether it's incident response, vulnerability management, asset inventory, and having continuous monitoring your environment, remote access, defensible architectures. And what are you doing in order to sustain that? You do it on your IT side for your business system. Sometimes it's always puzzling why you're not taking the same tactic over to your industrial control systems. Actually make the products that you sell to your clients.
Right. So we talked about a lot of problems. We did touch on the one case where it was addressed. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you can put in place. Now, again, a lot of the problems that we talked about is really you could take to the operational resilience level. You got to keep the operation running, whether it's power, whether it's fatigue related, whether it's security, physical security lapses, whether it's remote access, reduced staffing levels, that all impacts operational resiliency. Let's talk about a couple of things, at least in our experience, that you can put in place to help assist with that. I think you mentioned the monitoring, which we're big fans of, and how that would help in a situation like this, in this holiday season risk.
Yeah, well, there's tools and technologies that are built specifically for the OT environment that provide some of that resiliency. So today, if you can't have MFA in your OT environment, well, why not? Because there's remote access tools built for OT that give you that. Virtual machines. I was talking to a CIO here recently that they still have older Windows operating systems out there, which most clients do, but you can at least virtualize that HMI that's running on Windows 7 or Windows XP. Yeah, it's still an old unsupported operating system, but at least you can get it away from hardware that if that hardware failure happens, then you're trying to rebuild that thing, could be down for days, if not longer, versus a VM. Why don't you just virtualize it? So at least that way you can spin it back up pretty quickly if you have a hardware failure. So there are things that you can do in order to harden your operational practices and improve your security posture with technologies. But a lot of clients, they're not pursuing them. Some do. It's like if the best practice is to virtualize your industrial control system applications and your HMIs and your engineering workstations and your historians, well, why aren't you doing that? What's preventing you from doing that, right? IT's doing it. They do it all day, every day. Most of their stuff runs on a VM, except for the end user's personal laptop or computer that they're using. But why would you do that if you've got a ton of Windows XP machines? Again, I know a very large adult beverage manufacturer. That's exactly what they did. Right. To get away from that older suspect hardware they put all their old operating systems and applications on VMs.
Right. And that addresses two angles of the 5 critical stance controls that we talk about all the time. That one being response and
defensible
architecture. It gives you the continuity, right? And you have to think of that for operational resilience, continuity. Cybersecurity is part of that. Back to the monitoring just for a moment, because the monitoring will help if you're mature enough and you have the capabilities to help assist when your staffing levels can't. You put the processes in place and you put effective in there so that you can see not only what we refer to as the process integrity from the operational side, but also any potential cybersecurity threats also.
Yeah, like PLC changes, right? Process integrity. A lot of clients don't have a good mechanism to determine if somebody made a PLC change outside of the end result, good or bad, on what that control system change was, that PLC, as far as making product. Did I put too much glue on the boxes or not enough glue on the box? Did I put too much material on the roofing material or not? There's all kinds of screw ups. And so do you have a view into those types of changes? And I would argue that a lot of clients do not. It's kind of a ready, fire, aim mentality. Others do a better job of change control when it comes to PLCs, but then there are always those folks out there. I'm guilty of it on the networking side back in the day. It was always easier to have forgiveness than it was permission. But you only get so many of those, right?
Right.
You only get so many screw ups before you get into trouble. So the point is process integrity. Do you have tools, because you are light on staff, that are keeping an eye on the activities going inside your control system environment? New assets coming up, new protocols coming in, new user coming in, PLC changes, can you see all that stuff? These are all OT specific questions.
Right.
Again, people, process, and techniques, right? Tactics. It's not an IT conversation when you're talking about those things. Because I think in IT, when they think about cybersecurity around control systems, you're just looking for malware.
Right. And that's an excellent point. That's why we constantly say, look, it's operational resiliency and cybersecurity resiliency is part of it.
Right.
Everything that we talked about that are threats and risk in this holiday environment, it affects the operational resiliency. Cybersecurity is just a part of it. You get reduced staffing levels or fatigue and somebody makes a change. They called someone else to make the change, that it impacts it down the line later and you don't have the right change control, or you don't, like you said, you have new users. All these things can happen, whether it's cybersecurity related or not. I think that's where you start getting those tool sets in place. And if you can leverage them to let you know those things when you're short staffed and get eyeballs on them, and whether that's with your own internal staff or a third party or whatever that type of alerting system is made of. I mean, every plant has, some sort of safety alert out there. You can do the same things with this technology to address not only the cybersecurity issues, but those operational issues also.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.